When I was 10 years old, I lived in a small, quiet town in New York. Not much happened there, so it was a big deal when the house next door, which had been empty for as long as I could remember, finally had new neighbors moving in. One day, a moving truck pulled up, and out stepped a woman, a boy who looked about my age, and a little toddler. My dad and I were sitting on our front steps, chatting, when we saw them arrive. We immediately went over to say hello. The mom seemed friendly enough, but there was something a little off about her that I couldn't quite put my finger on. My dad introduced me to the boy, who introduced himself as CJ. He even reached out his hand for a handshake, which I thought was really strange for kids our age. But I shook his hand anyway, and then our parents left us to hang out. My dad insisted that I should invite CJ upstairs to my room, so I did, even though I wasn't too sure about it. Once we got to my room, I sat down on my bed, and CJ just stood there, staring at me with a blank, almost creepy expression. Trying to break the awkward silence, I asked if he wanted to play Mario Kart, but he had no idea what that was. I showed him some of my other video games, but he told me he didn't like video games at all. I was running out of ideas, so I suggested we go outside and play hide and seek. He agreed to that, so I told him he could hide first to get used to the area, and I'd count to 60. He ran into his new backyard, and I started counting down. When I went to find him, I discovered him standing in the most obvious hiding spot possible. Right behind the chimney, a place I had to pass by just to get into the backyard. At that point, I started wondering if there was something a bit unusual about CJ. After a pretty boring game of hide and seek, I told him I had homework to do, hoping to end the playdate. But CJ kept asking if he could come inside with me, finding ways to ask over and over again. Eventually, he gave up and went home, and I finally got some peace. The truth was, I didn't have any homework. I just didn't want to hang out with CJ anymore. That night, something really scary happened. I was suddenly woken up by a thud at my bedroom window. Groggily, I got up and opened the window, only to see CJ's face staring back at me from his upstairs window in the house next door. He leaned out and called for me to come over and play hide and seek. I was shocked and told him he was crazy, yelling at him to go back to bed and leave me alone. Then, I slammed my window shut and pulled down the blinds, trying to go back to sleep. But it wasn't over. Twice more, I heard something hit my window, probably rocks, but I decided to ignore it. Just as I was starting to relax, I heard a noise right below my window, like something or someone was moving around outside. The sound got closer, and then there was a loud thud, like someone had jumped or fallen. I started to worry. Was CJ trying to climb up to my window? The thought was so creepy that it almost seemed unreal. Then, I heard the faintest creak of the floorboards near my bedroom door. I turned to look, and to my horror, there was CJ standing in the doorway in his pajamas. In a quiet voice, he said, "Let's play hide and seek." Before I could even react, my dad burst into the room, quicker than I could have imagined. He was just as shocked as I was. Furious, he grabbed CJ and marched him back to his house. I watched from my window as my dad confronted CJ's mom, his voice raised in anger. We found out that CJ had simply crawled through an unlocked window downstairs to get into our house. My dad got a restraining order against CJ and his mom, but unfortunately, they didn't move away right away. For months after that incident, I had to awkwardly avoid CJ's mom whenever I saw her outside. Strangely, I never saw CJ outside again, but every single night, I would check my bedroom window, only to see CJ sitting by his window, staring into mine with that same blank, creepy expression. It got to the point where I kept my blinds closed 24/7. Eventually, CJ and his mom moved away less than a year later, and I never saw them again. But those unsettling memories have stayed with me ever since. When I was a kid, one of our favorite games to play was hide and seek, but we had our own twist on it. Instead of just one person being the seeker, we had teams. One team would hide, and the other would seek. The goal for the hiders was to reach a specific checkpoint without getting caught. The seekers, on the other hand, had to tag all the hiders to win. But tagging wasn't just a light tap. It had to be a two-handed touch on the back, like in touch football. We started playing this version of hide and seek when we were around 8 years old, and we kept it up until we were about 13. I grew up in a cul-de-sac with 3 other houses besides mine, each with kids my age. There were also a few other kids who lived just outside the cul-de-sac, so I always had a group of friends nearby. The cul-de-sac was our playground. It had plenty of open space, trees, and bushes, and since each house belonged to one of us, we could use all the property for our games. Plus, our cul-de-sac was right next to a nature preserve, so we even had the woods as an extra hiding spot, which made the game even more exciting. I remember one night in 2008, when I was 11 years old, we decided to play hide and seek instead of doing what most kids our age were starting to do, hanging out and trying to flirt with girls. There were only 6 of us that night, so we split into 2 teams of 3. My team was the first to hide, and as the other team began counting down from 30, we scattered in different directions. I ran to my next-door neighbor's house and came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. My friend had left a green blanket on his patio under some flower pots. I carefully moved the pots and grabbed the blanket, wrapping it around myself before crawling over to some bushes near the edge of the woods. Since our houses backed up to the nature preserve, some of us didn't have fences, which meant the woods were practically part of our backyards. My neighbor's house didn't have a fence, so I used the woods to my advantage. As I hid under the blanket, I heard the backyard gate creak open. I quickly darted into the woods, crouching low and pulling the blanket over me. Every so often, I'd lift the blanket just enough to peek out and see what was happening. Eventually, I saw one of my friends sneaking around the backyard, checking under tables and in other spots. While they were distracted, I made my move, shuffling on my knees to the backyard of the next house, where I could hear the sounds of one of my teammates getting caught. I lifted the blanket again to see what was going on and saw someone from the other team escorting my teammate back to the street. This was my chance. I threw off the blanket, took one last look around, and prepared to make a dash for the checkpoint. But then, something completely unexpected happened. I heard the crunch of leaves and twigs right behind me, the unmistakable sound of someone's shoe. Before I could even turn around, I felt 2 strong hands grab my shoulders, gripping me tightly. I let out a squeal of pain and yelled for them to stop, somehow managing to wriggle free and sprint toward the checkpoint. But I didn't make it far. I ran straight into one of the seekers at the backyard gate. When we all gathered in the street, I found out that both of my teammates had already been caught, and the other seekers were waiting there too. Confused, I asked, "Wait, if all of you are out here, then who was the one who found me in the woods?" They all exchanged puzzled looks, and none of them owned up to it. They swore they hadn't even gone into the woods. As I realized they were telling the truth, my heart started racing, pounding twice as fast as normal. I told them that someone had been in the woods and grabbed me with surprising force, but they didn't believe me at first. Eventually, I convinced them and we all went to tell our parents. The cops were called, and after that, my neighbor's parents put up a fence to block off the woods from their backyard. Despite this creepy incident, we continued to play hide and seek and flashlight tag until we were about 13. Our parents just made sure we carried flashlights from then on, and they left all the backyard lights on. Of course, the woods became off-limits after that. I have so many fond memories of playing with my friends as a kid, but that night remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my life.